This is Tommy from Studio Ultra Mega with another Operation Battle Ready tutorial. Episode 30, Non-Metal Metallic Steel. Today's colors all come from the scale color line from scale 75, but the brand is not important. What's important are the tones, and these are all really common tones you're going to find in all major paint lines. You're going to find a dark gray, a light gray, a white, and a periwinkle. So here I'm showing you on my wet palette kind of how I prep my gradients. And again, I always like to show this because it's always a little different every time because this is art, not science. I've created the dark gray gradient, a light gray gradient, and that's because I want to have that clean light gray in the middle to play with still. And then over here, a blue gradient that I probably won't even get to in time. It'll probably start to tack up there on my wet palette, and I'll have to put it out again. So anyway, here we are, and I've already laid down the base gray. This process is long. I've jacked the speed up on this tutorial 8 times. So that you can finish it and get to painting. I don't like to have gratuitously long tutorials. I just want to show you what you need to know. So first thing I did is I already laid the flat dark gray down over that surface. And because I was working with that dark gray, I also have the lights turned up, and you'll see later, once we get enough contrast on this piece, I can turn the lights down and the camera will still see things. But for now, the lights are up a little bright. And I've got this thing cranked super fast because what's important is color placement. And I want you to be able to sit through the whole video and see where all the colors get placed. I don't think you need to see me do slow motion brush strokes or anything. If that's something people need to see, by the way, if you want to see how to lay down a brush stroke, that could be a tutorial too. But I want to get through this so you can see the color placement that'll give this the metallic sheen that you want when you're trying to paint steel. This is always true when you're working with a gradient, but even more so with NMM because there's so much back and forth. To keep track of what color I'm using, you gotta watch the palette and watch where my brush hits the gradients. Because I'll go light, I'll go dark, I'll go back to light, all in the span of a few strokes if I'm trying to get an area to blend out nicely. Because when you do non-metal metallic, when you do your blends, you want them to kind of be tighter. You don't want the gradient, you still want it to be smooth, but more of a jump is okay because what you're looking for is sharper contrast. If you notice, I'm still giving it the same general light source that I use in all my painting. If I'm not doing a very specific project. I like to have a general overhead light source, so I'm sticking with that here. But you'll see that the blends are brighter, they take up less room, they're less gradual, more severe, but we're still favoring those upper facets that would catch the light. I'm also bringing these highlights down tight on the edges for some edge highlighting, and unlike usual where I always say don't go around the whole armor piece or the whole segment, here you're often going to go around the whole thing because it really does help with the NMM vibe to catch even those bottom edges and get some light gleams on there. Now we won't make them completely even as we build those highlights up on those bottom edges. We'll favor the corners as we get it brighter. So that we get some variation there. And you see there's a lot of trying to keep those edges tight, having to flip that model around a lot. And by the way, and also in a lot of these, you'll see me holding things at precarious angles. That's for the camera. There's a camera right in front of me and I'm painting around it. And there's a light right in front of my face. So it does cause me to have to hold things that don't look at this as a way to properly hold your brush or your model when you paint. As we keep moving up the gradient brighter and brighter, we start to focus those highlights tighter and tighter. I keep trying to capture that top front bend When you do NMM, unlike maybe if this was a ceramic armor plate, that top would be a real gradual blend off that top edge. But with NMM, I want that top edge kind of gleaming, that front bend right up on the top of his shoulder there. Also, we've moved on to a smaller brush. For the first part of this model, we were working with Monument's Bomb Wick Igniter size 1, and now we are working with a size 0. Keeping those highlights tight in those gleams. And as I'm going through these highlights, I'm really favoring this, where these two panels meet here, actually the three big ones there, where I'm really hitting that gleam hard. That's really popping out for me, and like a lot of this, you go by feel, and while you're painting, as you start to see these things gleam, like become attractive to you while you're painting, start to emphasize them. I don't like the "that's not technically correct" approach. Do the highlights that look good, man. There's not really a wrong way. You know, lights could be coming from any direction when you're looking at a standalone model. You know, just try to keep it consistent throughout the model, and then it will be convincing. All these highlights could come directly from the side. It would just look like the light was coming from the side. That's the only difference it would make. All this back and forth over the same areas that you're seeing is me pushing and pulling these transition points, you know, where I think it's too abrupt or it's taking up too much room. It's a lot of back and forth and correction and correction and correction. That's why it's so vital that you're working with very thin and fluid paint, not just thin, but fluid. You need that to be workable. When I say fluid, as opposed to just being thin, I mean your brush has to still be able to be loaded with paint. You don't want it just barely touching the bristle. And a lot of times if it starts to dry, I'll just use a wet brush right on the model just to re-wet the paint so I can keep moving it around. And the ability to keep that paint workable lets you make these fine adjustments to your blends. So at this point the contrast was getting a bit much for the camera to register. It was kind of whiting out on me there, so I've knocked the light down a peg so you can see the blends better as I continue to brighten up these edges. Okay, we're about done with this part of the process, and I'm pretty happy with the blends, but it still doesn't look like metal, it just looks like extremely highlighted gray. The next step would be the secret ingredient, and that is the reflecting color. Okay, yeah, you can use a bunch of different colors to be the reflecting color, and it can set a different mood or give a different texture to the steel. I'm going to blend my dark gray up through periwinkle. I could have done it through a rust orange, and it would have given a very dry, wind-burnt look. I could have done a dark brown. I could have done a purple. But I'm going to use a blue here for our giant robot from the ice planet to give it a very cold, clean look. So you see, we're just kind of doing blends in the other direction. But notice I don't bring it all the way up to the edge if I can see the edge of the armor panel. I do not bring the blue all the way there. I like to leave that dark gray border before the edge highlight. It makes it look metallic to me. And the only time I let that reflective color kind of go all the way up to the edge is if there's an overlapping armor, like right here where I'm currently painting. I'm letting the blue go all the way to the edge because that bottom piece kind of feels like it's overlapping to me. We just keep building these highlights up brighter and brighter the same way we do any other highlight. And as we get brighter and brighter, I like to start to favor a corner rather than a whole edge. But, you know, that's a season to taste issue. Do whatever looks right for the piece of armor that you're working on. And as we wrap up my own personal answer to the riddle of steel, I would like to take a moment to thank all of our patrons over at Patreon that make these videos possible. Your continued support and help really grants us the time to spend on this, and we thank you so very much. And if you found this video useful or entertaining at all, please like and subscribe.